On the 22nd of February, 1797, George Washington's 65th birthday, the most celebrated chef in America walked off the Mount Vernon plantation and was never seen again. His name was Hercules. He had cooked Washington's presidential state dinners, dressed in tailored clothes, carried a gold-headed cane through the markets of Philadelphia. He was also enslaved. And the food he had perfected in Washington's kitchen was part of a vast tradition, built by people who, by American law, could not own a spoon. This is the story of how that tradition was built. Now let's travel back. And we're going way back. A cabin in coastal South Carolina. It is past midnight. The cooking fire is 2 hours old, the embers low. A woman whose name appears in no record buries cornmeal dough wrapped in cabbage leaves directly into the ashes. By morning, before the overseer's bell, she will scrape the ash off and feed her children before the workday begins. She has no oven, no measuring cups, no knife she is permitted to own. She cannot write down what she is doing because she has never seen a cookbook. And the food her descendants will eat under the names barbecue, gumbo, fried chicken, soul food. That food is being invented right now, in the dark, by hand, in defiance of every constraint the law has placed on her. How? That is the question this video is built around. Before we continue into the cabin, we need to understand the architecture of the world she is standing in. A working plantation in 1790 had 2 kitchens. The big house, where the master ate, had a formal kitchen, usually detached from the main building because of fire risk, often staffed by an enslaved cook who had been formally trained, sometimes in Europe. The cabins where the enslaved themselves lived had a hearth, if anything. Sometimes a single brick fireplace shared between 2 families. Sometimes only a clay-lined pit dug in the dirt floor. This was deliberate. Cookware was property. Property was wealth. Under American slave law, an enslaved person could not legally own property of any kind. Not a pan, not a paring knife, not the spoon they ate with. So how did anyone cook anything? That is where the story gets stranger than any textbook tells you. The first thing to understand is that cooking, for the enslaved population of the American South, did not happen during the day. The day belonged to the field, 12 to 16 hours, 6 days a week, dawn to dusk. Cooking happened at night, in stolen hours, or on Sunday, the one day in the week most plantations gave off. That is when the food got made. The raw materials came from 2 sources. The first was the rations, weekly cornmeal, salt pork, sometimes molasses, occasionally a ½ pound of fat. Frederick Douglass, in his 1845 autobiography, described his own ration as 1 peck of cornmeal and 1 pound of pickled pork per week. He wrote that the pork was, his word, often tainted. That was the entire planned diet of millions of people. The second source was the provision ground. On Sundays and after hours, enslaved families were sometimes permitted to plant small plots of their own. In the rice country of South Carolina and Georgia, in the lowlands of Louisiana, in pockets of the West Indies, these gardens kept entire populations alive. They grew okra, black-eyed peas, watermelon, sesame seeds called bene, sweet potatoes, and greens that no white planter would touch, collard, mustard, turnip tops. Almost every one of those crops came from West Africa, brought in many cases in the hair of women being marched onto slave ships. Hidden seeds, a genetic memory of how to feed people, smuggled across the Atlantic in the only place enslaved bodies were not searched. That is the raw material. Now consider the toolkit. There was, on most plantations, exactly 1 cooking implement per cabin or per group of cabins. A cast-iron pot, 3-legged, heavy enough to wear a person's back out carrying it from one fire to another. Sometimes called a spider, sometimes a Dutch oven. It belonged to the master. It was loaned, not given, and it was shared among as many as 20 households. Everything went into that one pot. Take stew. Greens cooked with the smoked pig parts the master discarded, feet, jowls, neck bones, intestines. Cornmeal mush, beaten with whatever fat was on hand. Beans soaked overnight, simmered for hours over banked coals while the cook slept. None of this was a stylistic choice. The one-pot meal was the only thing the cookware allowed. That single pot is the direct ancestor of gumbo, jambalaya, hoppin' john, red beans, and rice, and every variation of soul food stew that descends from them. The word gumbo itself comes from kingombo, a Bantu word for okra brought to Louisiana from West Central Africa. The thickener that defines the dish is West African. The technique is one pot. The name carries the language of the cook across the ocean and into the recipe. Then there was the pit. A pit cooks meat differently from a pot. A pit is dug into the earth, lined with hardwood coals, and used to slow roast whole animals over the course of a full day or longer. The technique exists across multiple cultures, but its American form was perfected on the plantations of the Carolinas and Virginia. Enslaved cooks running pit fires for plantation gatherings, for weddings, for political rallies, for 4th of July picnics that the cooks themselves were not invited to eat at, became the architects of what is now called barbecue. The pit is the engine of every regional American barbecue tradition. Carolina whole hog, Texas brisket, Memphis ribs, Kansas City burnt ends. Each region's signature style maps to which crops grew there, which animals were raised, what the local enslaved population was working with. The credit, when it appears in cookbooks, almost never appears with their names. Some names did survive. Hercules, no last name preserved, was the chef in George Washington's presidential household in Philadelphia in the 1790s. He was widely regarded as one of the finest cooks in America. Contemporary accounts describe him moving through the city's markets in tailored clothes, carrying a gold-headed cane. He was permitted to sell kitchen scraps for personal income, an estimated $200 a year, an enormous sum for an enslaved person at the time. On the 22nd of February, 1797, the day of George Washington's 65th birthday, Hercules walked off the plantation at Mount Vernon and disappeared. He was never recaptured. James Hemings, Thomas Jefferson's chef, was trained in Paris during Jefferson's ambassadorship in the 1780s. He brought French haute cuisine technique back to Monticello, including the baked macaroni dish that, after Jefferson served it at the White House, entered American cooking as macaroni and cheese. Jefferson freed Hemings in 1796 on the condition that he first train his own brother as a replacement. Hemings died in 1801 at 36. Jefferson's records called the death tragical. Many historians read it as suicide. Then there is the cuisine that has no names attached at all. The hoe cake, cornmeal batter cooked, according to multiple primary sources, on the blade of a literal field hoe held over a fire. The ash cake, dough wrapped in leaves and buried directly in coals, the version our cabin cook is making in our opening scene. The cracklings, the chitlins, the head cheese, the pickled pig's feet, every part of the animal the master rejected, transformed into something the cook actually wanted to eat. And then there is rice. Carolina gold rice, the variety that built the entire economy of the South Carolina Lowcountry in the 18th century, was cultivated using techniques that did not come from England. They came from Senegambia and what is now Sierra Leone. Enslaved people brought from those regions arrived with the most sophisticated rice cultivation knowledge in the world at the time. Carolina planters knew this. They specifically purchased people from those coasts because of it. The wealth of an entire American region was built on the agricultural expertise of the people who could not own a grain of what they grew. Here is what is hardest to grasp about this story. The cuisine these cooks created, the recipes, the techniques, the entire logic of how it works, was almost entirely transmitted orally. There was no other option. Teaching an enslaved person to read or write was illegal in most southern states by the 1830s. Virginia passed its statute in 1831, after the Nat Turner Rebellion, with penalties up to 20 lashes. Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina followed. By the 1850s, the entire Deep South had laws on the books forbidding written instruction. So the recipes traveled the only way they could, hand to hand, mother to daughter, mouth to ear. By feel, a pinch of salt, a handful of meal, a fire hot enough to spit on. By smell, by the texture of dough between two fingers. The measurement was the body itself. When the cookbooks finally appeared in the early 19th century, the names on their covers were almost always white. Mary Randolph's The Virginia Housewife, published in 1824, contained recipes: gumbo, beaten biscuits, fried catfish, transparent pudding, that almost certainly came directly from enslaved cooks in her household. None are credited. The most influential American cookbook of the antebellum era is, in significant part, a record of stolen authorship. That theft is what historians like Michael Twitty, Jessica B. Harris, and the late Edna Lewis have spent the past 40 years undoing. Twitty's book The Cooking Gene, published in 2017, traced specific dishes back to specific African origin points using genetic and culinary archaeology. Harris's High on the Hog mapped the migration of West African ingredients across what she called the Black Atlantic. Edna Lewis, born in 1916 in Freetown, Virginia, a town her grandfather founded after emancipation, wrote down the cooking of her elders before it could be lost to memory. The cuisine they reconstructed is the cuisine of America. Every Independence Day grill that lights a piece of pork over a flame is operating inside a tradition perfected in a slave cabin. Every pot of greens, every plate of fried chicken, every spoonful of gumbo or red beans or mac and cheese sits at the end of a lineage that runs through provision grounds, smuggled seeds, shared iron, and stolen hours of sleep. The cuisine that conquered America was invented by people who weren't allowed to own a spoon. That is what remains. Not the cookbooks with the wrong names on them. Not the menus that left out the cooks. What remains is the food itself, eaten every day, in every state, by people who in most cases have no idea whose hands first shaped it. If you want the names back in the story, the work is already being done. Read Twitty, read Harris, read Lewis, and the next time you taste something at a backyard cookout that feels older than any cookbook can explain, that is because it is. It was invented in the dark, by people who did not have permission, and survived anyway. If this story belongs in more places than it currently lives, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. The next one goes somewhere even fewer people are looking.